Hi there, it's Ron Gula with another episode of the Gula Tech Cyber Fiction Show. Today we have author and university professor, and I'm just going to say cybersecurity activist, Peter Singer. Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well and psyched to be here. Cyber and fiction. I mean, as people who know me and what I've written, these are my passions. So this is great.
When we started the show, we really wanted to target, folks like yourself, folks who actually do cyber. You're a professor. We'll talk about your background a little bit, but also people who write fiction. So much of what's going on in cybersecurity these days seems like science fiction, directed energy weapons, nation state attacks crippling our stuff. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Oh, fantastic.
Can you tell people a little bit, maybe before we get into like being an author and being a teacher, but how did you get here? What's your background?
Oh gosh, we can go back to the very beginning. I was one of those geeky little kids, and I think a lot of people watching this might have been them or have a kid like it. If you handed me a stick growing up, within a couple of minutes, I would have turned that stick either into a lightsaber or a Tommy gun. So I'd either be battling Darth Vader or the Nazis that somehow had showed up at our neighborhood. And what I'm getting at is that I've always had an interest in topics of history, technology, but also that cross with science fiction. And so my background, I'm more of a kind of, you would say, an academic. I went and got PhD, wrote a series of books on topics that range from the rise of the private military industry to pertinent to our discussion on cybersecurity, an explainer book called for Oxford called Cybersecurity and Cyber War, What Everyone Needs to Know. I also background worked at nonprofits like the Brookings Institution. I'm now at New America, which is a nonpartisan think tank. And have been in my sort of policy research and consulting focused in particular on issues of new security and new technology. So it evolved, as I mentioned, from private security to cybersecurity to another book looking at social media weaponization called Like War. Advised government, military, corporations. I teach a class at Arizona State University on cybersecurity policy, and then to your title of the podcast, have my other identity, which is I write fiction. In particular, a genre of fiction that we call useful fiction, and have done a couple of novels with my partner, August Cole, that one was called Ghost Fleet, and it told the story of a World War III, what it might look like. And then more recently, a project called Burn In that explores AI and Internet of Things and what are some of the cyber risks that come out of it. And that led to the final identity. I know I'm going on, but I started up a business called Useful Fiction that does this similar kind of work for other organizations where we help them explain complex topics and new issues through story.
So thanks for that background. And not only did you said you went to university, but you did some work at Princeton and Harvard, right? Not a lot of people go to both, so that's excellent. So we're going to talk a lot about your books and your writing as we go through them. We'll probably talk about them a good bit. But how do you end up writing those? Like, what led you to say I want to write a book? And your first book was more fiction than nonfiction.
So and people sometimes when they'll ask advice, like I'm thinking about writing a book, I'm thinking about doing a dissertation. The way I'll put it is you're going to spend multiple years of your life with this project. So you better have a passion for it. You better find it intrinsically interesting. And that's been the thread that's come through my work is a riddle, a question that I was curious about, but often, and this is on the nonfiction side, a riddle or question that I felt not enough people were engaging with, or the conventional wisdom on it was wrong. So the very first book that I did was the look at private military contractors. And it came out of, I was actually on a research mission. This was in the wake of the war in Bosnia, looking at certain whether the war was going to restart. I was part of a UN investigation, and there were these civilians. We called them private military contractors, who they were businesses, they were businessmen, but they were selling the service side of war. So they weren't selling weapons. They were basically a new corporate version of mercenaries. And it was just, hold it, this doesn't fit with the way that we think of business or war in the modern times. And so that was my first project. The cybersecurity book, and I'm sure you've had similar experiences. It came out of, I was at a conference, and I'm not going to name names. A former, it was an intelligence agency director, gave the keynote, and he used the phrase, all this cyber stuff. And I thought to myself, and he then went on to say something that was technically inaccurate. But it was more like, if this leader can only describe all of this by cyber stuff, we need an explainer. We need, and that's what that book project was about. Is it basically took the roughly 50 top questions that people had on cybersecurity, and tried to provide answers to them. And basically, it was either for the business, political people, they tended not to understand the technical side. They need to, understand threat actors or malware. In turn, the more technical people needed to understand the policy and the politics and the legal side. So that was that riddle of it. For the novel, it came out of, the project was called Ghost Fleet. It came out of a nugget of an idea that was both a fiction and a nonfiction idea. The nonfiction idea this was back in 2013. I was looking around and felt that we were far too focused on what we call counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, the small wars, as they were sometimes phrased. And I was looking, and China, it was very clear to me, was a rising peer competitor, and that there was going to be great power tension there. Now we're all, of course, well, yeah, but back then that was not it. The security world was focused on the Afghanistans and the Iraqs. In turn, there was maybe we could just engage China, and they'll be, we could shape them and they'll be our friends. So was looking at that, felt there was a need to explore, understand it, but in particular, that it would not be a repeat of the Cold War, that including because of cybersecurity issues, it would play out very different in both the competition and the what if there was a war. And so we did research on everything from supply chain security questions to we could go into that, but that was the nonfiction side. The fiction side was August Cole and I. August was a Wall Street Journal reporter. We were friends. And we'd both grown up loving Tom Clancy, but old Tom Clancy. And we wanted to recreate for readers that experience of it. And so we came up with an idea. We came up with a novel. We pitched it to the publisher. And the publisher was like, but Clancy stuff is all terrorism today. And we're like, yeah, but we want to go back to that. We turned in the draft. We included the references because we didn't know any better. We wrote a novel, but our rule for the novel was that everything that was in it had to be drawn from the real world. And like good nonfiction guys, here's the reference to prove it. Here's the DARPA report that documents it. Here's how this particular attack was conducted by the United States. Here's the link to the Snowden file that revealed that we did it to someone else. What if they did that to us? And so we turned in this novel, but with footnotes, and the publisher was like, well, novels aren't that way. And we're like, well, but we want to show how it could all be real. And ultimately it was published, and that had the the book took off, but and also it proved to be sort of a teaching exercise for people where they could both enjoy it, but also learn something as well as it surfaced some real world issues. And so that's what I'm drawn to, is what's intrinsically interesting. What do I enjoy working on? But also, what do I think other people might find useful?
So when I was reading Ghost Fleet, I definitely got the callbacks to the early Tom Clancy, and even some of his books he's done with Larry Bond. And they actually had Larry had a career doing military war games, Harpoon, and that kind of thing. So when you were writing Ghost Fleet, I mean, it's a war with China. It kind of happens in Hawaii, and there's space and cyber. It's been out for a while. I don't want to do any spoilers or not. But did you have like different scenarios? Like the first time somebody said this is going to take place in Hawaii, were you like, nah, it's got to be Taiwan, it's got to be Stratly Island, something like that? Like, how did you war game that out?
So there's one that's really kind of you for that parallel, because in particular, the Clancy book that we were kind of inspired by was his second one. And it was the only non-Jack Ryan one. It was Red Storm Rising. And to your point, Larry Bond was actually an uncredited co-author on Red Storm. So it says Tom Clancy on the front, but he helped write it, is my understanding. And it came out of, as you noted, the work on Harpoon, which was both kind of, we say war game. It was both for fun war game, but people were using it for, this back in the 80s. I mean, it was an early version, but for like actual, like trying to figure out different military things. So when and this goes back to the concept of useful fiction, think of it as a morning smoothie. So you have a white paper, you have a strategy paper, you have in the military, we call them an AAR, a war game, and then the after action report on what you learned from the war game or the training exercise. That's giving someone their vitamins, because PowerPoints, white papers, AARs, they got the good stuff, but they're often not all that compelling, and people don't enjoy reading them as much. A milkshake, it's tasty, it's delicious. But it's maybe not all that good for you. That's the techno thriller space. And that's, and I love my techno thrillers. That's where sci-fi is as well. That's where Clancy is. It may be realistic, but it wasn't designed like a smoothie, which is, I'm trying to give you the good taste, but give you the good stuff as well. And so when we're building the plots, we're simultaneously world building, character building, but we're also conducting research. Ghost Fleet had 27 pages of research endnotes. The more recent one, Burn In, it is a deliberate package to explain AI. We can talk about that further, but you're building scenes and characters by what do you think will illustrate key things that I want to express. That also means, though, you're trying to service the entertainment side. So we, in designing a scenario around what a US-China war would look like, obviously it could start and take place in many different areas. The Taiwan Straits one, though, to us, it didn't serve as well on the entertainment side because everybody's heard that story before. Everybody thinks of it. But the second thing, what we wanted to express was, looking 5, 10 years out, 15 years out, maybe, there's multiple other geographic areas where the US and China might come to blows. In fact, they might come to blows in multiple places at once. And that even in a world where if the Taiwan issue was settled, there would still be tension between the US and China. And that actually came from a research report out of National Defense University that we're pulling from. So what I'm kind of after is that you're selecting plots and scenarios by like, what do you think is going to be educational, but also exciting, interesting, different? We wanted, as part of, again, we don't want to give too much away, but obviously there's cybersecurity aspects of it. We particularly wanted to express supply chain security issues. It's so fascinating to me, that was a kind of a bold or revolutionary thing to have 5 years 7 years back, and now it's like top of mind for everybody. Another thing we wanted to show was counterinsurgency, and what were the lessons that both other nations and enemies were pulling from Afghanistan, but what were the lessons that our own forces were pulling from it that they might use in future wars. And so we wanted to have there's a storyline in Ghost Fleet that's US soldiers, but now they're the insurgents and they're using the tricks of the trade. It was also a way of poking holes that in that scenario, the enemy, the bad guy, is using almost all of the current US plans on how we'll apply technology to do counterinsurgency, and all-seeing eye in the sky, face recognition, et cetera. And we're trying to make the point, hey, this is our plan, but there's workarounds to it. There's human workarounds to it. Just in our story, the good guys are the ones doing the workarounds as opposed to the Taliban.
I think that's well said. So when you research these books like Ghost Fleet, we'll get into Burn-In here in a little bit more, you're referencing them. And are you at all worried about, like in Tom Clancy, the beginning of Red Storm Rising, they talk about an F-19 stealth fighter, right? At the time, everybody thought it was the F-19. And of course, we got the F-117 comes out of that. So when you're researching stuff like this, and even your scenes where there's you don't say Richard Branson, but there's a Virgin kind of space flight thing that's a key scene as well. Time goes on, and you kind of have this risk of, was it right? Did it become overcome by events? Like, how do you feel like these stories are going to stand up over time?
Well, I mean, billionaires in space, how preposterous that sounded 5-7 years back. And, this week as you and I are talking. So a couple of things. By it being grounded, by our rule, for example, is it's not just real world settings, it's real world technology. We call it the no vaporware rule. Every technology in it has to be drawn from the real world, either already being used or at least at prototype stage. Similarly, if there is a certain type of cyber attack, we just don't say, clickety clap, we're in. You have to explain, okay, here's how the malware made its way through. And what I'm getting at is that by grounding it, we're putting in references. It might be from a demonstration that someone did at Black Hat. It might be something that is a type of attack that hit one type of target, and then we can assume that might be utilized to hit another kind of target. It might be interviews and relevant to the world of cybersecurity. As you well know, there's the kind of things that people will say over drinks. Man, this happened. It might not yet be written in a threat report, but we capture those, or it'll be the system's a little, we cut some corners. The system's a little more vulnerable than, I argued for this to be fixed, but it wasn't. The CEO wouldn't listen to me. And so what we're doing is sort of surfacing something that's real. And the result is that we have huge portions of them come true. We actually track it online. There's for Ghost Fleet, it's hashtag Ghost Fleet moment. For Burn-In, it's hashtag Burn-In book moment. And, again, it's everything from certain political trends coming through to certain hacks that we project coming through. We Burn-In, for example, there was supply chain security things that have since happened in Ghost Fleet that we've seen play out. Burn-In, we did interviews of a variety of water systems engineers, and in turn, there were threat reports. And part of the issue we felt was that the critical infrastructure field and the discussion of critical infrastructure threats was so focused on the classic, the power grid might go down, that we were missing all of these other sectors. And it was funny, the week that the book came out, you had the attack in Israel against their water systems. And then a couple of weeks after the book came out, you had the incident in Florida. And people were like, is this part of your book marketing? But to your question, in the novels, we try and ground it so that it feels more real, and then things invariably come true. there is one aspect of it that I would say that's a little bit different, and it's the parallel, and it's something that you know as well as sometimes the best in the intelligence field, the best predictions are the ones that don't come true because you pointed out the trend coming, right? So it's that it had an active prevention, so to speak, by someone becoming aware and taking action to prevent that scenario. And so there are certain things in Ghost Fleet that will not come true because of Ghost Fleet. Ghost Fleet prompted 3 different government investigations of basically there's certain things that happen in this book. Could they happen? What can we do to prevent them? There's other elements that will come true, but will mean that there's certain things in the storyline that won't happen. The Marine Corps ran a war game. It was classified and then reported in the Wall Street Journal as entitled The Ghost Fleet War Game. The US Navy has a $3.6 billion ship program called the Ghost Fleet program. So there's these kind of influences that happen that mean some things won't come true, other things may come true, but not exactly in the way that the book had it, but it's linked to the book, and that's pretty cool.
So again, without going into all the major plots in the book, there's stuff that happens in space. There's cruise missiles and anti-cruise missiles at sea. It occurred to me that if you watch the Godzilla movies or Transformers, even the Marvel movies, Space Gravity, they do a great job of representing ships at sea, missiles launching, stuff occurring in space. So has anybody approached you about movie rights, trying to turn Ghost Fleet into a movie?
So, longer conversation. The rights were purchased, not though the direction that they chose. So here's the thing: as a writer, the rights get bought, and then you don't control it. It moves on. And so they explored doing it as a TV approach, as a multi-year series. And then that approach was not successful. We could have a kind of longer conversation around that. And the rights are back out in the open. I obviously think it could be, if you're speaking to literally the most biased person in the entire world, to me, there's a great story to be told with stakes, and sort of to take you back to, if not movie, the big 1980s miniseries. So the conscious influences of it on the fictional side were, as I mentioned, sort of the great early Tom Clancy books. And then there's Herman Wouk's Winds of War series, which if you haven't read it is phenomenal. And when I'm saying the model of it is that rather than following a single character in a single setting, you tell the story of a war from multiple different perspectives. The characters sometimes link in a certain way. So in Herman Wouk's Winds of War, which was a phenomenal book and a wonderful miniseries, it follows a father-son who are Navy captains, but it tells also the story of the war in Europe, and it's got someone behind enemy lines and the like. And for us, it was the same thing, where you have a certain storyline that's at sea, you have another storyline that's cyber, you have another storyline that's space, you have a behind enemy lines. And so to me, kind of the miniseries approach is a better one. But again, I'm going to put my nonfiction hat on. Part of having that design was trying to portray something that we now call multi-domain. It's the idea that, different than the wars that we have been fighting for the last 75 years, the post-World War II wars, that there will be battles for control of not just the land, like in an Afghanistan, but that you will be fighting for control of air, sea, like in a World War II, but also battles in these spaces where we've never fought before, outer space, cyberspace. And then in the real world, and what's great for storytelling is small actions in one realm can have massive consequences in another. So one tiny move in cyber can cause a win or a loss of a battle at sea. And even sometimes actions by someone, they might not even understand the effect that they're going to have, or it might be an effect that's immediate, or it might be an effect that plays out 2-3 years later, which again, in the realm of cybersecurity, there's moves that happen, to put it bluntly, the first battles of World War III have already been fought, and they were completely silent because it's someone dropping malware into a system, just sitting there waiting 10 months back, whatever it is. Same thing, and I'm playing with the silent is the old, you might remember the marking for the Alien movie, in space, no one can hear you scream. Same thing, you'll have contestation in space in a US, China, or Russia conflict. It's not going to be, laser beams, but, there will be moves in space that again determine the success or failure of some land battle or air battle.
Would you ever do a sequel to Ghost Fleet?
This was interesting. So, I'm going to sort of peel the back for you on the burn-in project. We had that conversation, August and I had that conversation along two different routes. One was, are there further stories that we want to tell in the world of Ghost Fleet? And then second, what kind of career do we want to have? And what's the impact that we want to have? So kind of the second part is we basically described it as the approach of Clancy versus Crichton, who are, and I'm not comparing myself to them. My God, if I could have, a smidge of their success.
You have to write a few more books.
Yeah. And they have to sell a lot more. But what I'm getting at is, other than that book that we mentioned, the one with Larry Bond, Red Storm Rising, every single other Clancy book all took place within the same world. And I remember reading it was one of them, one of the early ones with Jack Ryan, and he just kept advancing. And my grandfather, who's passed away, but he jokingly said, Ryan keeps getting promoted. He's going to be president of the United States at some point. Became president, So you have one approach, which is everything takes place in the same world. By contrast, you had the Crichton approach, which was, I'm going to select a different interesting topic, kind of a sciencey topic, and then explore it through fiction, right? And so, one might be, Jurassic Park is really about breakthroughs in understanding of DNA. You have a different one that's, AI or climate or whatever, and he always kind of chose a different one. And we thought to ourselves, that seems to us more interesting for ourselves. It also is more impactful on the world. And so that's what we went after with Burn-In. For the Ghost Fleet reader, there are Easter eggs in there that they will recognize, but you don't have to have read Ghost Fleet to follow it. And none of the events of Ghost Fleet had to have happened for the story to matter, or for the story to play out. The story, and what we were after is, if Ghost Fleet was what would World War III look like, but also nonfiction side trying to convey issues in cybersecurity, supply chain, et cetera, great power conflict. Burn-In, the storyline is a hunt for a terrorist through the streets of Washington, D.C., 15 years out. But the nonfiction side was, we basically sort of surveyed, what do we believe and what does the research show is the most important but least understood technology issue out there, and it's AI. And so the design of the book is to convey, here are insights on AI. How does it work? What are its applications going to be, including into Internet of Things and the like, and then what are the threat vectors that come out of it? So it's again, you're trying to be instrumental with what you're doing, but you're also just becoming captivated by a story. And we like the way that Ghost Fleet ended. It ended in a certain way. I didn't just, as a storyteller, I wasn't drawn to, we told the story of World War III. Well, now we'll do World War IV. It just didn't feel like that. We had a different story that was more compelling. We also had a different topic that we wanted to explore, nonfiction side.
With so the last sort of Navy question, we'll get into burn-in here. So we have UFOs in the news as well the last couple months here, and particularly the Navy. So just as you're researching, Ghost Fleet and just military technology and cyber and whatnot, have you ever run into issues where maybe some of these things that people are seeing on their displays are cyber attacks? It's been a long time that we've done electronic warfare. Like I can make multiple bogeys coming up next to my airplane as I'm flying in for a bomb and run. Why not use cyber and pretend that there's UFOs out there? Have you ever run into anything like that?
I've not in my research, and I I would just say, what I found interesting about those reports out there is the diversity of them. So there are some that could maybe fit that category of someone conducting electronic warfare or cyber, and we obviously have a little bit of a smudge between the two. You also have, the fact that so much of EW and cyber is creating the equivalent of a glitch. And glitches happen for other reasons too.
The radio's not working, right?
Yeah, right. But there are a number of the other incidents that are naked eye issues of what someone has seen, or it's hard to figure out the rationale. There's some settings where you could say, okay, yeah, this makes sense. It's off of this test range, so it's either an intentional or there's a kind of unintentional effect of maybe some EW or some electronic warfare or something. Or there's other ones though that they've been in locations that's hard to parse. So, I mean, the short answer is I don't know. What I find so fascinating and compelling is we're two serious people. We're having a serious conversation about the unexplained flying object phenomena. 5 years ago, one or both of us would have been ashamed to openly talk about it. And that, I think, has been the importance of those reports. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean alien, but it just means there have been a series of incidents that from the data that is out in the open, and notice those are massive caveats, there's just some things that are unexplained right now, and maybe they get explained.
Well, we can only hope. I think that's fine. All right. So I love Burnin'. Burnin' is your most recent fiction book. Like you mentioned, it's a story about AI. There's a robot partner, android partner to a human FBI agent, but it takes place in DC. So I think that might be a little bit more home turf for you and me. But it also takes place in this timeline. You said about 15 years out. The world you built, the subtle details you put into the world, like there's a scene where you're driving in traffic, you're quickly going from auto drive to manual drive, knowing how to beat the other drone cars, like that kind of detail I thought was like really, really, really good. So, origin of Burn-In, why'd you do it? How's the book treating you so far?
Oh, well, one, I appreciate that, and also like you picking up on the little tiny details. And there's a saying that with science fiction, it's not about predicting the car; it's about predicting the traffic jam. And that's a little bit of kind of what we're after, is that and look, we see versions of this in the real world. Think of to give the DC example, think of the one of the first deployments of a surveillance robot into DC was the one in the Georgetown Harbor that then accidentally drove itself into a water fountain. By contrast, the very same system was deployed in San Francisco, and it was used to police a homeless encampment. And so what I'm after, and so my nonfiction and my fiction hat are drawn to these, it's real world technology in our real world, but it plays out in ways that are different than the classic, sci-fi story of we get robots and we get the robot revolt. And so, as was said, the idea of Burn-In was, we, on the nonfiction side, wanted to tell the story, wanted to explain, this crucial technology that matters so greatly that honestly we don't all well understand sufficiently. And that's not just me saying that. There was a survey taken of leaders, and over 90% of them said that AI is the most important game-changing technology that's out there. If I remember the number correctly, 17% of them said that they understood it, how it works, what are its applications. That is a massive delta between saying something is important and I don't understand it, right? And it would matter, it's not just whether it's AI, if it was, icicle pops. If you had that 91 to 17%, you say like, I got to close that. And, but the hard reality is that most people are not going to go read a white paper on applications of AI or an academic paper on issues that are going to surface from it, like algorithmic bias, which matters whether you're talking about I'm using AI for medical treatment or for my business to I'm using AI for policing. Algorithmic bias is a huge issue. So we approached it with this package of, we call it useful fiction, where we designed a story to convey this research. There's exactly 300 real world insights baked into the story. But as you said, the plot line of it and the setting of it is all within Washington, D.C., set roughly, we don't put an exact date on it, but kind of 15 plus years out. That was for a couple of reasons. We wanted to show the different ways that AI will be used in our world. And when I say AI, I'm also referencing Internet of Things. It becomes more advanced. So you follow the characters as they take a tour through the city. You see them everywhere, from the train station to the Starbucks. To the great thing about DC is you get to see rich neighborhood, you get to see government, you get to see poor neighborhood. DC's got some rural areas right near it. So we go see suburbia, we go see the rural area. And so you get this sort of tour by following this set of characters as they go about. Then you had the fiction side, which was we wanted to tell the story of, we grew enamored of this idea of a partnership. We're not giving too much away, but it's kind of like a buddy cop story. There's the veteran and there's the rookie. Just in this case, it's what we have to do with robotics, which is they don't come out of the box smart. You train them. And so we have this notion of training sort of the next version of an Alexa or a Siri, combined with where the hardware side is going to go. But then we had the flip side. There's another character who's our bad guy. And equally, there's sort of a nonfiction, but also a fiction thing that I'm drawn to, which is, okay, how are bad guys going to take advantage of our next world? So we're creating an Internet of Things. What is a bad guy going to do to that? But also, how does a bad guy get around the growing surveillance around us? And so that, hits this, again, I think real world and fictional itch to scratch. And I wanted also to have a bad guy, or sorry, I should say, we wanted to also have a bad guy who is compelling in that the motivation is not, and I am a bad guy and I do bad things. And now I will, pull at my mustache. Without revealing too much, our bad guy, his ideology kind of makes sense in a certain way. There's an empathy to it. We can kind of go, oh, I see where he's coming from. And there's also a little bit element of, there's a great old, not that old, but Clint Eastwood, one of his later ones, In the Line of Fire. And Clint's not so great in it, but the John Malkovich character in it, the bad guy, is sort of has been made by the world around him. And that's what we were after with our bad guy. And sorry, you asked about the reception to it. It's been challenging in that, it came out in kind of pandemic period when, bookstores, airport bookstores were just reopening. So it's done well, but what's been really cool is the reception on the policy side. We've been invited to brief the lessons of the book to well over 60 different organizations that range from CIA, NSA, Fortune 100 companies to military, JSOC, the Special Operations Command, to the Navy, to the to the President of the United States. And we're teaching our lessons of what's going to play out with AI, but we got in there because of a novel. And that, to me, again, points to the utility of the useful fiction approach. One of the other things that's been cool about it is it's starting to be used in colleges, but very different colleges or universities. So we've heard back that professors have utilized it in cybersecurity classes, business entrepreneur classes, Duke Law School, and like political science classes, each one for a very different reason. But I think it's, again, it's the research, but a novel. So for the assignment of the professor, it's just like for a general or a CEO, the ask of the student, hey, this week we're going to read this novel, but we're going to apply it to our problem, whether it's entrepreneurship to let's talk about Internet of Things, cyber threats. That's a very different ask of even 20-year-olds or whatever 28-year-old grad students.
Well, I found the world that you built there not only just full of details of what future tech could look like, but the question I think is going to be like 15 years from now, are we going to look back and there's an expression, you can judge the past by their vision of the future. But I kind of think the world you're painting is very much a world that could come in. Was there any technology that you wanted to put in the book that just didn't make it?
Wow, that's a great question. One of the things that we tried to hit is this notion that some people's utopia is other people's dystopia. And, that goes back to, the notion of the panopticon, a building where your every move is monitored. That was originally this positive concept of, and we can use it in factories and the like. And then it was like, well, but we'll also use it in prisons, to now a world where your every move is monitored is everything from, well, it feels like 1984 come true, to, well, that's my entire business plan. That's what I want to, that's how I'm going to make trillions of dollars. I'm going to monetize your every move being monitored. And so that, I think that's going to be interesting if people, 15 years from now pick up the book. I think they'll be drawn to, for some people it'll be like, wow, this is dystopic. To other people, like, this seems really optimistic compared to the way that things turned out. Yeah, I hope that kind of captures what you're after with that question.
Oh, absolutely. And to your point earlier, this is not a book about robots, kind of rising up or taking over, or even, a lot of these robot movies where it's really a story about humanity. Oh, the robot was more human than we were, right? This is a movie about AI. It's a machine with an algorithm, and I don't think it's given anything away, but I really liked how clearly that kind of came through.
I really appreciate that. And again, we were after trying to tell a story in a different way. The story of robot uprising, it's literally, the word robot itself comes from it. It was in a play in 1920, RUR, and, the machine wises up, it grows intelligent, and then it rises up, kill all humans. And almost every treatment of robotics in fiction has pulled back to that. There's always that notion. And look, I love my Terminator movies and the like, but we wanted to tell a different story, but also look at the world around us. Yes, there is maybe one day an issue of existential threat from robots alike, but that is not going to happen in your and my lifetime. Our issue with robotics is, and with AI, is the industrial revolution that it is. It's the ways that it will be applied, the ways it will be used for good, for bad, the ways that will be misused, the unexpected consequences, the manner in which it's used in a business, but also its ripple effect on politics, the new legal and ethical questions that we have come out from it. And so that, to me, was the lesson, but also we wanted to, it just felt like it's just more interesting to portray. It's a more interesting story to me to tell.
So I was literally debating, I was going to walk over to my bookshelf here where I have my Star Wars figures from my childhood. I have an IG-88. And as I read the book, I really felt like the robot looked like IG-88. But what did you envision when you wrote the book? What did you draw on any robot that's out there?
Well, we actually, again, draw from real world. We describe TAMS. So TAMS is the system, and it's an acronym for Tactical Autonomous Mobility System. And in the storyline, it's and it's again drawn from real world projects where much of the work there is work in legged robots, basically a robot that follows a human model. They, as opposed to the big hulking system, they tend to be designed to be slightly smaller than the average human adult. And so that is TAMS. They, however, as what appears to be the trend line, that actually isn't, unlike the Terminator movies, not where warfare is headed. So in the storyline, it's a Pentagon system that doesn't work out. Much like there's a variety. I mean, and y'all have seen the YouTube video, and it's doing cool parkour jumps and the like. But guess what? That's not what we need on the battlefield. So it's that real world system. Similarly, the way the heads and faces of them are done. There's a whole thing around uncanny valley. So it will have features, but non-specific features because of the way humans react to it, almost like a Japanese no mask. But so slightly smaller than human, bipedal. But the software side is similarly, it's not, again, and then the robot discovered that it had a soul, and then the robot decided we're not going to plot spoil, and I'm sorry, we'll plot spoil. It's not. And then the robot decided to kill all humans. It is basically taking where we are right now with artificial intelligence and moving it slightly forward. So it's, the equivalent of your Siri or your Alexa, the decision systems that are out there, kind of all of that, both advancing and then also being brought together. That means that it has the real world limitations that we'll have. There will be some things that it is very good at. There will be other things that it is terrible at. It also means, and what's cool is the way that you were describing it is from the writer's task. TAMS is not a character in the book. TAMS is also a character in the book. That is, it's a robot. That means it's a piece of technology. Everything that it says or does has to be because of programming. And however, the way humans react to it, both in the story and we, the human readers, is we can't help ourselves. We will put intent and emotion on top of our technology, even when we know we should not. So to give an example, yesterday, we have Siri, Alexa, the like. I'm not going to say specific so that I don't sound like I'm promoting or my system gets hacked. But basically, I'd set it to do an alarm while I was cooking. The alarm went off. I told it to stop the alarm. It wouldn't do it. I said it again. I said it slower to stop the alarm and clear. It wouldn't do it. And then I yelled at it. I'm yelling at a toaster, right? I'm yelling at, so it doesn't care, but yet my emotion, I can't help myself. And so the same thing, there's hopefully for readers, there's a moment in the story or a couple of moments in the story where you're imprinting your emotions on what happens to this robot, which you wouldn't if it happened to your car. But that's part of what we're going to experience or already experiencing in the real world.
Any same thing as with Ghost Fleet, any movie rights or TV series, sequels in the work, that sort of thing?
Yeah, Burnin', this part can be public. CBS bought the rights to it. And that was, reported in media and attached to a really cool showrunner who'd done, he'd worked on everything from like Star Trek Voyager to more recently, the Sherlock Holmes TV series, and they're doing their thing, and it'll happen or it won't happen. It'd be awesome if it did, but I'm enough of a realist to know that just because the rights and they work to develop doesn't mean that it's going to be on a screen near you soon. But it would be phenomenal. Yeah.
Are you writing another fiction book now?
So not a book, but a series of projects that we've actually pivoted. And this was mentioned in the intro, after the experience with Ghost Fleet and Burn-In, other organizations began to approach August Cole and I about not taking the ideas that we had decided, so supply chain security or AI, and then we'd go write a story out of it. They said, can you help us with our important topics? They ranged from the Norwegians had a war game. We didn't design the war game, but they had lessons from it. We turned those lessons into a story. Their report of the lessons was read up to the 2-star general level. Our narrative that took those same lessons was read all the way up to their Minister of Defense. A cyber example was the Cyber Space Solarium Commission. They had an incredible research team. What was it, like 40 people who worked about a year, produced a phenomenal, lots of different insights. But it's about, I think is it like 183 pages?
It's long.
And so they asked us to do a new version of an executive summary. So it took the key themes and issues of the report, but package them within a narrative. And even more, we designed the narrative to hit the emotional trigger of their target audience. So it's a narrative that really goes after congressional staffers with the idea that they get the key issues, but they also get emotionally put in the position of, and now I want to act on these recommendations of the commission. And then the third thing that happened is the Air Force came to us and said, don't write for us, teach us how to do forecasting. You guys have predicted things. You also communicate well. Can you help us? Can you teach that? And so we built a executive education course around it. And then we, and you're the expert here, we then realized, hold it, the Air Force is not the only entity in the world that has executive education and forecasting needs. The Cyberspace Solarium Commission is not the only entity in the world that's ever written a white paper that no one wants to read. And so we turned it into a business, and we started months back. But basically what we've been doing is we've been doing these writing, but for other entities, themes, strategy papers, trend reports, or we've been running exec ed courses teaching, and it's been everything from a business to government executives. Here's how you do forecasting. Here's how you do communication more effectively, and not just writing stories, but as you well know, storytelling is if you're writing a memorandum or you're doing a pitch, storytelling is the key to doing it more effectively. It's not just the facts of the matter.
Oh, I can absolutely tell you that the ones with the best stories, the ones that get funding. Now, this is all done under the Useful Fiction LLC.
Yes, that's awesome. The name of it. It's Useful Fiction LLC, or if you want to go online, it's useful-fiction.com. And yeah, it's been cool, and it's been exciting. We get to explore these different projects. We've created some really fun scenarios and vignettes that have some have already been put to work. Other ones are going to be put to work. Like I said, we've done these training courses for everything from. I'm just back from doing one for the Marine Corps, but we've done them for businesses as well. But then the other part has been like this learning experience of basically being an entrepreneur and like figuring out like, well, how should you price it to, wow, should this, what should be in a contract or not? And I've learned the things that I'm an expert at and the things that I am definitely not an expert at.
So one question about you're a professor for University of Arizona, and you teach
Arizona State.
I apologize.
You'll get into some trouble there.
That's right. So the course
Sun Devils.
What do you? Amen. What is it that you teach? And then are the students like? Do they come to this course and then like, oh my gosh, you're an author and you've written about this kind of stuff, or are they still like new to cyber and they're like, hey, thanks, professor. We'll see you next Tuesday.
So this is actually so Arizona State is it's a state public university, but several years back it basically started a project to try and remake the American university, and it was a leader in moving to online courses, not just for students in Arizona, but trying to reach wider. It also had other cool things like your freshman year is you go through it and you don't pay to the end of your freshman year until you decide whether college is for you or not. So they looked at the security studies field, and they basically identified that there were either high quality in-person security master's programs, the war colleges and the Georgetowns and the like of the world, or there were a lot of fly-by-night online stuff that weren't delivering high quality online graduate education, because they're just trying to, they're basically, it's about charging the people, and they're having hundreds of people in the class and the like. So ASU set up a security studies master's program online, but with relatively small classes. And so I teach the cybersecurity policy classes within that program. The students, to your question, so it's online. The vast majority of them are, so they're outside of Arizona. They tend to be, don't hold me these numbers, but about half are Defense Department. They're your officer who is not able to go to war college or is moving into a specialty and wants a little bit of an education on it. Another part is corporate, someone who's looking for a little bit more insight. They're not able to physically go to an MBA program. It might be because they're, in Palmdale, California, or to the military side. We had officers that were doing the class on the side while they were deployed in Afghanistan, because weirdly enough, you actually have a lot of time on your hands when you're on deployment. You had some who were people just starting in the cybersecurity field who want that policy side of the education. We had one person who was he was a dentist who was just really passionate about security studies issues, and he was going, he was starting his career over. So that's that mix of people, but it tends to be, like I said, about 50% Defense Department. Your question about the author, the design of it, it's a mix of lecture and Q&A and reading. And the Q&A, what I make a real strong push to do is, so it's not just me lecturing at them. Each week I try and find a practitioner or expert in that field, and or someone who's written one of the things that they've read. So when they take my course, and this to draw people in, you might read like Andy Greenberg is phenomenal writer for Wired magazine, did a great book. We'll read his look at the Russian, it's Sandworm, which looked at one of the Russian APTs. You'll read it, and then we'll do a Q&A with Andy. Or we, on the corporate threat side, interviewed Jen Easterly. Cool. We'll keep that interview, even though Jen's mostly talking about corporate side at the time, because she's at JP Morgan. Well, she's moved on to do even greater things. In the White House now. So it's not just lecture. You're getting that Q&A conversation with some of the top practitioners or writers in the field, and that's how I approach it. And hopefully they enjoy it. So far, they've enjoyed it a great deal.
That's phenomenal. So I think as we close out here, I'd like you to take a minute or two and just tell us what's going on at New America and what you're trying to accomplish there, and maybe how people can help out.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because we've sort of, in essence, I've got these different hats. There's book writer, there's this running doing for hire. And then there's this, I call it sort of the nonprofit side. And the nonprofit side, New America, a phenomenal organization. If you're not familiar with it, it's a think tank based in Washington, D.C. It's nonpartisan with a particular focus on understanding the issues that are how America is changing and how technology is changing and how those come crashing together. There's programs at New America on everything from digital rights to understanding distance learning. I, in particular, obviously connect to cybersecurity issues, and the two projects that I'm really passionate about that we're doing that I think might be of interest to the audience. One is our cyber citizenship project. And it is a program designed to provide teaching tools to K through 12, in particular, in dealing with how to teach new threats as they increasingly move over to what we would call the information warfare side. So the way to think about it is that if you are using the internet today, you need a combination of skills. You need critical thinking skills, sometimes called digital literacy. You need what is sometimes called digital civics or digital citizenship. That's how to behave properly online, cyberbullying and the like. But it's also about, we want the internet to reinforce America and its positive, rights and law and the like. You want it to be positive, sort of the general notion of citizenship. And then you have the classic cybersecurity side, which is threat awareness. I need to understand that there are threat actors that are trying to manipulate me. And we need all of these skills now, whether you are dealing with, you're searching for voting information, you're searching for public health information about the vaccine, to you're a 10-year-old searching for your research project on who built the pyramids. You need this skill set. And unfortunately, in the United States, that cross is not taught in many school systems. Or if it is, it's not taught well because the tools are not gathered together. And so the Cyber Citizenship Project is a partnership between us and the Florida State Education System to create, one, research on how to teach these skills better, and second, to bring the tools together into a one-stop portal. And the portal is literally going to go live in a couple of months, so that a teacher can go and get the tools that they need. So I'm a fourth grade teacher, social studies, here's the tools for you, which is different than I'm a 12th grade teacher of a journalism class and I want to teach about misinformation. Here's the tools. And the tools means everything from reading material to educational video games to curricula. So that's one program. And then another one that you and I have talked about is and it's not just New America, it's a larger program called Share the Mic in Cyber that is, Share the Mic in Cyber is basically designed to help essentially diversity efforts within the field of cybersecurity, in particular, Black cybersecurity professionals. How do we not just expand the pipeline, which is much of the focus, but rather how do we aid those already in the field, which of course returns back to the pipeline issue, because if you've got issues of racism in the field, if you've got people that are facing challenges that are particular to them or they're not being highlighted, then why would you think that it's not going to, why would you think the pipeline is going to solve it completely? So that's another program that's been really cool to be involved in.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So professor, author, we've got the useful fiction. We've got
entrepreneur, I guess is what we would say. Or you're the business expert. You tell me.
What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Apparently someone's calling right there.
Yeah,
no,
they're calling you right now. They want to buy the rights to
they're finding out from you how to call me. No, it's all at pwsinger.com. And that's where my writing is hubbed at. New America, all our work is at newamerica.org. And then the business side, for people that are interested in these questions of how do we apply narrative and story to explain our core issues, that's easy enough, useful-fiction.com. My kids joke that, Daddy, you need just one job. But you can kind of see my personality. I like different parts of my brain working on what I see as different needs.
Well, I really appreciate not only your time coming on the Gula Tech Cyber Fiction Show, but also just the light you've brought, not only just to the diversity issue we just talked about, but just these complex social and technological problems, writing books about it, teaching other people how to write about it. So thank you very much for coming on the show today. And I just wish you the best of luck, how you endeavor communicating and solving things in the future.
Oh, thank you again, both for your kind words and for having me on. Really do appreciate it.